We are surrounded by more information and insight than any other generation in history. Yet the general population, especially the Christian population, is decidedly ahistorical. We float through our lives with no understanding of how we truly arrived at this moment in time. We can easily find out who won the 1925 World Series, what the first words muttered into a telephone were, or why Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the door at Wittenberg. But outside of a few factoids and a disjointed web of dates, what does the past have to do with us today? What heritage does it have in the present state of affairs with its art, politics, and technology? If you're a Christian, the answer is more than a single podcast can cover. Over the course of its 2,000 years, Christianity has created great nations and peoples. Those people have created great innovations in technology. They've painted great paintings and sculpted great sculptures. They've written great books, music, poems, and plays. They've built great churches and cities. If there's something you love about your modern world, odds are you wouldn't be here if it weren't for some very real Christian influence on history. With principles such as the dignity and superiority of all human life, the natural selfish state of man, the existence of a metaphysical reality, the uniformity and knowability of the universe, and the importance of the written word, it's hard to overestimate how much of modern life was actually introduced or perfected by Christians. As Christians today, the body we were grafted into was actually born 2 millennia ago and rose through history to produce you and me, to render glory to God in this exact time and place. But what will we do with this inheritance? Are we gratefully living, doing, and making things for His honor? Do the stories we tell ourselves and others glorify the one true, gracious, and triune God? Do we desire to create in our Father's footsteps, following His lead as the creator of all goodness, truth, and beauty? Or does God deserve better? You're listening to God Deserves Better, a program dedicated to equipping the saints to create like our Creator. Welcome to God Deserves Better. I'm your host, Zach Lovelace.
And I'm Jonathan Laura.
Nice to meet you guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah.
We, Johnny and I both, come from the Christian television industry, and collectively we have about almost 10 years of experience working in that field, and then also have other creative projects outside of that specific ministry. And so, yeah, we're filmmakers and we love Jesus.
Amen. In our experience, professional experience working in the Christian television industry, we have come across this thesis basically several times that what we're making, God deserves better.
Mm-hmm.
Unpack that, actually. What does God deserves better mean?
When we were working together, we would often be surrounded by guys that sentiment was a very common sentiment. Yeah. So something that we slowly picked up on as being part of like a disjointed movement, if you will, of Christian creators, not just filmmakers, but musicians and every other kind of art, finding ourselves saying, I think God deserves better than this. It's always true. That's the tricky part of that phrase.
We are all imperfect humans, glorifying a perfect Savior.
It is a little bit of a uninspiring, I'll never be good enough. How will I ever measure up?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your theology and how you look at this whole issue, and that really dictates your response to that statement, true. God deserves better. So first of all, just to really encapsulate what this means, for those of you who may not.
You got this far and you have no idea.
For those of you who have gotten this far and may have no idea what God we're talking about, we are talking about the God of the Bible.
Yep.
The Christian God.
Yes, the triune Christian God as seen in the 66 books of the Bible.
The one true God deserves better.
Yeah, and that deserves portion of that, I think, is intimately wrapped up in the relationship between creator and creature. We owe God everything because He's given us life, which is kind of hard to grasp for modern people. I think we're just in an age that's kind of defined by ingratitude. That's kind of what the opening monologue is all about, is that what are we going to do with all of this?
Yeah.
Can we actually render God an amount of gratitude? The answer obviously is no, we can't actually justify ourselves before God. But in terms of the works that He has saved us for, I think through Christ and through the Spirit, totally. You look at Exodus when God was having different craftspeople make the tabernacle and even the temple later on with David, they made a real thing and it pleased God. Obviously, we don't have a direct pipeline to God in terms of I'm hearing exact, this film needs to be 99 minutes long and 6 frames.
16:9 ratio.
Would God like 4:3?
4:3.
God likes 4:3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Come on,
30
man.
frames.
Yeah, 30 frames per second. Yeah, the deserves aspect of God deserves is something that I think exclusively in the Christian, like you said, your theology is kind of borne out in there, that the Christian God who came and lived a perfect life and freed me from having to perform my way to heaven.
Yes.
Christ already did that. So my films, my works of art, they don't contribute to that. It's just the fruit of my gratitude.
Yeah. I would say the goal is threefold. We're basically trying to call up our fellow saints, our fellow Christian brothers, to make better films, not just on the theological side, but on the technical side as well.
Yeah.
And we're taking this from a very humble stance that Zach and I have not arrived.
No, we are with you in the trench.
Yes.
And God deserves better than Johnny and I. That first and foremost applies to both of us in this. Film is a language.
Yes.
And if you barely know Spanish or barely know Russian, you're not going to be as proficient in communicating. If you're choosing to communicate that way, can you speak fluent cinema? As a film watcher as well, like, you can dissect film much better.
Yes.
If you understand, like, it is the marriage of a ton of arts. So you have the drama of theater, the performance of theater, you have a little bit of the choreography of dance, obviously for musicals and stuff like that, but even blocking in a scene, music, paintings, photography, that's composition, that's color, how light plays in a scene, and editing. Editing is the thing that's actually just almost exclusively film.
Yeah.
Obviously television as well. The arranging of images to produce a certain emotional reaction.
Yeah. That's actually ties into a quote I have from Sergei Eisenstein. He says, "Now why should cinema follow the forms of theater and painting rather than the methodology of language, which allows wholly new concepts of ideas to arise from the combination of two concrete denotations of two concrete objects. Language is much closer to film than painting is." He was one of the pioneers in Russia, Soviet Union.
We love the Soviet Union, by the way.
I'll let Zach speak for himself.
Yeah.
But he was one of the pioneers of film, and he's famous for Battleship Potemkin, the famous stair scene.
The baby stroller going down.
Yes. If you've been in film school, you know that scene. Film is telling a story, and it is a language. It's a very effective language.
I agree. As a writer, that's an interesting thing to think about, because there's a whole... I was watching one of these videos the other day, these iceberg videos.
Oh, yeah.
An iceberg of linguistics. It is so cool.
We'll put the link in the description.
Yeah, exactly. But it is interesting. And then to think about film being equally as deep as that. And film doesn't have a different language. It's not all, I mean, obviously there's like subs and dubs and stuff like that, but like a close-up means the same thing, because it's tied very intricately to how God created us as creatures to take in this information.
High contrast lighting is a very dramatic scene.
Yeah, the tilted angle is like uneasy. And
But yeah, I would say that's probably the main reason as to why films are so important.
Vladimir Lenin of the Bolshevik Revolution, again, going back to Soviet Russia. I'm not actually a Soviet or anything. Just Johnny and I have a long buried short film an animated short film about a Soviet superhero that maybe you'll learn about at some point.
Maybe it will see the light of day at some point.
Maybe. But Vladimir Lenin once said something to the effect of, cinema is the most powerful form of communication that he had ever seen. And this is early 19-teens, and he still made that statement. Kind of crazy for him, because nowadays you could see that. It's like very obviously you could see that.
Oh yeah,
we live in a video and film dominated world now. Johnny, you said this is threefold. The goal of GDB is threefold.
Yeah, the second one I would say is tear down that sacred and secular divide that we see in film.
All of film belongs to God. Every film is a Christian film because we're Christians.
Yes.
And unabashedly, I believe that the Christian God created this world, and there's not an inch or molecule of it that doesn't belong to him. And so that would mean the divide here is that there are films that glorify God and tell the truth, and there are films that tell lies.
Sure.
About God's reality, like lots of films.
Yeah. I would say today it's a lot more at the surface. Obviously, it's a lot more propaganda like.
So what you're saying is that there are films, all film belongs to God because all of reality belongs to God.
Yes.
But there are films that are obedient in depicting his reality.
Yes.
Whatever that might be, whatever the camera is pointed at. And there are films that are disobedient.
I would say more obedient and less obedient because it's all his reality.
Yes.
It might, purposefully trying to disobey, but you still cannot escape the reality of God.
Oh, yeah. And
as hard as you try.
Romans 1 would say that, the atheist knows what they're doing.
Yes.
If I'm making some awful Last Temptation of Christ or something like that, that's just a totally blasphemous movie that is exploring a non-reality about Jesus, that's like the height of disobedience.
Yes.
As opposed to the Passion of the Christ.
Yes.
No. Great movie, very, very technically great movie, but we'll get into that. We'll put a pin in the passion.
Put a pin in that.
So put another way, neutrality doesn't exist. Neutrality doesn't exist. There are efforts for God or against God. That's it. And I've heard Pastor Doug Wilson say it this way, that it's not whether, it's which. So it's not whether or not something glorifies God, or that whether or not this is something that is God's, but it's which God's. Who does it belong to? Secularism is not neutral. It is always espousing, and this is something that's like super easy to see nowadays.
Sure.
Easier than ever, especially with the kind of subgenre of YouTube conservative critics, like picking on Disney movies as a career, basically. And they deserve it. Don't get me wrong. Those movies deserve to be bullied into non-existence. Oh, yeah. But this idea that Christian films are this tiny little subgenre that have like D-list actors in it kind of at the end of their career.
And Kevin Sorbo.
And Kevin Sorbo.
He's a C-list.
Okay, I mean, C-list, D-list. Yeah, it's like an awkward artistic place where it's more evangelistic than it is cinematic. And I think things are getting better in that regard.
Oh, yeah.
Those films are getting better technically, but really there's no such thing as a Christian genre, is what we're saying.
Now, you said there's no such thing as a Christian genre. Mm-hmm. I would say there is, but there shouldn't be.
Okay, yeah.
And I would say that film as a medium is Christ's, to better clarify our stance.
Film as a medium is Christ's. I like that.
Yeah.
To kind of hammer this home, there's people who might be listening and they're like, oh, that's not true. I don't want to believe it. Here's some proof. Cinema's been around for almost over 100 years. And maybe 10, 15 years in, we had the emergence of the Hays Code, which was a self-imposed set of rules in 1934 because the Hollywood system, the studio system, and the films that were being created, the actors and everything had earned the title of the new Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Christian population watching, which was the majority of the U.S. back then, was watching films with a lot of disdain and concern about the way things were going. And so a group of Catholics, some Protestants got together, and they created this code that dominated the cinematic landscape for about 30 years until 1968. But the reason they did that is because they knew what the films that were being made were not neutral. And you see it nowadays, especially like I'm espousing a view about a marriage, about homosexuality. That's not a neutral take. In what world is that a neutral take? You're saying something about the nature of humankind, and that by definition is a moral plane. It's how human beings should and shouldn't act. So there's no neutral playing ground. And to believe that there is to just concede. You can't just make a neutral film. It's always espousing. It's always lifting the audience's morals toward scripture or lowering them.
Yeah. And now going into, as we've teased it, the third pillar of God Deserves Better, become better filmmakers. And like I said before, this applies to both Zach and myself. We want to become better at our craft in the technical sense, not just in the theological sense.
Yes, not just having a good understanding or the right understanding, proportionate of how to view it, but rather how to actually execute. A big verse that Johnny and I go back to is Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man skillful in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men. It doesn't qualify secular or not secular. It's just kings.
So we're the obscure men as Christians.
I am 100% an obscure man. The only one who sees what I'm doing is God.
Yeah. So Zach, why would you say we should seek to be better filmmakers, to unpack this point a little bit more?
Yeah, to piggyback off of the Proverbs 22:29, we should seek to be better filmmakers because it gives God more glory. And it communicates something about his world and his reality. I mean, even just saying that God owns all these things is true. We shouldn't live by lies. Everything you do, eating, drinking, or making movies, should be unto the Lord. Yeah. So what does it mean to give God glory in filmmaking?
In the technical sense, it means to be masters of our crafts, like you said. And what is the medium we are using, how it is used effectively, to have the right purpose in mind.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Christians set out with film to be a tool to spread the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
That is a good thing to want, but it cannot be done as directly, or else it becomes ineffective and almost like, I would say, an echo chamber.
Oh, yeah. They're literally preaching to the choir.
Yes. Yes.
People who consume these films are Christians. And I would say they're primarily, from my own like understanding and just seeing people watch them and talk about them, it's primarily a Christian wife whose husband doesn't go to church, but at least I'll get him to watch this movie. So they all have that kind of Hallmarky feel. Cheesy,
Lifetime, yeah.
Lifetime, high on emotion, schmaltzy,
Yeah.
kitschy.
Oh, yeah. He's going to get saved at the end. Don't worry.
Dude, I'd love to see one made in total cheese. Like everything is the exact same, but then the guy doesn't get saved at the end. He just walks away.
That's good.
Anyway.
But yeah, like even to the history of art, Christians have mastered their craft. There's paintings, books,
Everything what we said that rolls into filmmaking.
Yeah.
We've been masters previously, and we have this little hiccup in history. I'm in the middle of reading this book called The World Beyond Your Head by Matthew Crawford, and he talks a lot about that idea. The transfer of knowledge from one generation to another is extremely hard, and it's not as simple as we think it is in terms of education. There's so much more to that.
This generation has access to the world in their pocket, and I would say we are not as bright as previous generations.
That's a very kind way to put it.
Yeah.
We are not as bright. We are better equipped nowadays. This goes back to our third pillar, to make films as Christians, not plugged into the Hollywood system. Cameras used to be as big as a room. Like literally Edison's camera was the size of a shed. And nowadays we've gotten to it. It's in our pocket. And I get that gets overplayed a little bit. Like going back to Campus Movie Fest, the better cameras, they will technically make a better film. But if you have an amazing story, it doesn't matter what you're shooting on.
You still need to have better techniques, I would argue, as well, on top of the story.
The technique, as I was saying, the cinematic language. If you're good with cinematic language, even with your iPhone, knowing what limitation, okay, my iPhone has one focal length. What can I do here? Try not to stretch people's understanding of what they're watching. If I'm going to make a film with just my iPhone, then make a film about someone FaceTiming, like two people FaceTiming.
Or a found footage film.
Exactly. Like we've seen so much. And so we're so hyper aware of cinematic language nowadays. We cannot fumble it. Like we have to be absolute masters. And even
There's no excuse.
There's really no excuse, because there are so many YouTube channels that will teach you what to do. There are master classes. There are schools you can go to. There are books you can crack open. And the patient man wins. You don't need to rush things. You can gather as much knowledge as you can. And I think, unfortunately, I do think you have to be a jack of all trades. The film structure out in Hollywood is
starting off, you do.
Yeah, you got to wear multiple hats.
Yeah, and you'll work your way up to a more specialized area as you grow. Also,
what's great about film is that you get to taste so many different things.
Oh, yeah.
You may realize I like costuming.
Yeah.
Like out of everything, or production design or something.
I found out I liked animation halfway through my career.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And that's something that you still continue to do.
Yeah.
And professionally are getting, where we're working a small agency, you're still getting animation work.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're starting to specialize over time.
Yeah.
So the 3 pillars, to kind of recap, the point of GDB is to cover these 3 big pillars. One is equip the saints for cinema, that you need to learn and master the cinematic language as a viewer and creator. And then pillar number 2, the sacred secular divide. It doesn't exist. Stop acting like it exists.
Film belongs to Christ.
Yes. And then finally, to become better filmmakers, the final pillars, to become better on a technical level, as well as theological level, that these things should be held in proportion. I should be a master of my craft, and I won't stand before obscure men. I won't just be making videos for my mom.
An obscure woman.
Yeah. And I do think it's theologically connected that you get better at your craft. I'm sure Paul made amazing tents.
Yeah. I think craft is kind of like the vessel for glorifying Christ.
Mm-hmm. And it's inescapable. Like we said before, like I could be creating Nike shoes.
Yes. There's a lot more at stake with certain jobs, clearly.
But we would be better if we treated it like that as well.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot at stake with film.
There is.
It sculpts American society.
And it sculpts people's imaginations. But so yeah, those are our 3 pillars. And while you're listening to God Deserves Better, we want these conversations between Johnny and I and guests that we're going to have. You would profit, listener. that you would profit off of these conversations that we have because you yourself are having them.
Our long-term goal is we want to have a network with you guys and just have a good films that glorify Christ.
Create things, create like our creator, and be inspired to do that. So let's land this plane. That's a lot of big talk. We talked through our 3 pillars, got to know a little bit about us, and to hold dear some things, just as a matter of closing here, is that 2 Corinthians 5:9, that we make it our aim to please him. That in all of this, that we're not just dunking. We're not just dunking on people. I feel like I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I hear and see that a lot in Christian
so easy
media.
to pick on the unpopular kid.
It is, as opposed to call him up.
Yeah.
Just wait till I get my confidence. Yeah, I mean, I want Christian filmmakers to be more confident and professionally, technically, that is something that we seek to do.
It's so much easier as fellow Christians and film enjoyers. It is so much easier to tear down Christian films or the Christian genre.
Yeah.
But we really need to build each other up.
Like the dweebs in high school.
Yeah.
The dorks.
It's so much easier to give them a wedgie.
It is. And you want to. You really want to. And sometimes they deserve it. Sometimes they deserve an atomic wedgie.
They have a very punchable face.
Yes. That is a good way to describe it. But as somebody who has a punchable face, I can say that if we can call them up and out to make films because God owns cinema, that hopefully our films can turn people's affections toward God and goodness, truth, and beauty. So just to tease a little bit, can we tease people?
Sure.
A little bit. I know we said we're not going to bully people, but can we tease them?
Sure. We're going to tease you to what we have upcoming.
Script contests, reviews. These are all big goal things, but we would love it. Absolutely. I'd love to read somebody's work.
Part of building the network.
Exactly. Ranking movies, commentaries, interviews, teaching resources, and obviously work of our own, like pumping out stuff that we want to do. Our Soviet yeah, exactly. You might see that. GDB might be the thing that actually is able to bring that to life. So let's get out there and work heartily for our good and gracious God, the Redeemer of men. Thank you for listening to God Deserves Better, a production of Pemmican Studios.